ABC General Hospital spoilers reveal that the moment Jacinda confirmed the pregnancy, everything around Michael shifted. It was not joy that arrived first, and it was not hope. It was pressure. It was dread. It was the suffocating realization that another fragile life had now been pulled into a world already overflowing with secrets, unfinished wars, emotional wreckage, and the kind of danger that never stays buried for long in Port Charles. For Michael, the news did not land like a miracle. It landed like a threat wrapped in tenderness, a possibility so life-changing that it immediately awakened every fear he had tried to keep under control. He already knew what it meant to love children in a city where innocence was always the first thing placed at risk. He already knew what it meant to build a family in the middle of lies, betrayals, and power plays. But Jacinda's pregnancy felt different. It came with hesitation, shadows, and the unmistakable sense that she had not told him everything. That was what began to consume him, not simply the pregnancy itself, but the silence around it. Jacinda had not shared the truth immediately. She had carried it alone, buried it, protected it, perhaps even hidden it with intention. And once Michael understood that, he could no longer separate the child from the secrecy. Every instinct inside him pushed him to ask why. Why would Jacinda conceal something this serious unless fear had already taken root? Why would she delay telling him unless she believed that this pregnancy would trigger consequences she was desperate to avoid? Michael had lived through enough betrayal to know that hidden truths always arrive carrying damage. Even when the secret is born from fear rather than malice, the damage still comes. The mind still races toward the worst possibility. The heart still begins to prepare for another blow. Jacinda's fear only deepened the anxiety already building around her. She did not carry herself like a woman eagerly preparing for motherhood. She moved like someone bracing for impact. Every word felt measured. Every explanation felt incomplete. There was a nervousness beneath her restraint that made the whole situation more unsettling. It was not just that she was pregnant. It was that she seemed haunted by it, as though this unborn child had already become tied to danger before ever taking a first breath. As though the pregnancy was not only a secret, but a trigger connected to something older, darker, and far more explosive than Michael could yet see clearly. Then came the comment that changed everything. Jacinda admitted that she did not want her daughter to end up in the same kind of situation she once had. At first, the words could have sounded innocent, like the abstract fear of a woman imagining the future and wanting better for her child than she had for herself. But in a place like Port Charles, where the truth rarely hides quietly and almost every careless sentence carries the weight of buried history, the remark did not fade. It lingered. It grew heavier. Michael could not let it go, because it did not sound theoretical. It sounded personal, immediate, specific. As if Jacinda was not speaking about some possible future daughter at all, but about a child who already existed. That possibility tore open a new level of obsession inside him. If Jacinda had a daughter she had never told him about, then the pregnancy was not the only secret. It was merely the newest one. And if there truly was another child, a little girl somehow linked to Jacinda's hidden past, then every foundation under Michael's understanding of her began to crack. He started replaying every conversation, every hesitation, every look she had given him when the subject of family had surfaced. Suddenly, her silence no longer felt accidental. It felt structured, intentional, protective, the kind of silence a person keeps when the truth is too dangerous to say out loud. The name Phoebe began to hover over everything like a ghost. Whether whispered in memory, buried in old decisions, or attached to a private grief Jacinda had never confessed, Phoebe became the secret center of the storm. Michael could feel that there was something deeply painful and deeply unfinished tied to that name, and the more he sensed Jacinda guarding it, the more desperate he became to know what she was hiding. Was Phoebe her daughter? A child she lost? A child she abandoned? A child she had been forced to separate from for reasons rooted in fear, shame, or coercion? The uncertainty was maddening, because every answer led to an even darker question. If Phoebe was real and Jacinda had kept her existence hidden, then why now? Why let the truth tremble so close to the surface only after confirming another pregnancy? Why act like a woman terrified of repeating a past mistake unless the past mistake had never truly ended? For Jacinda, the pressure became unbearable. The pregnancy was not only exposing her vulnerability, it was dragging old wounds back into the light. She had spent too long surviving by controlling the narrative, by revealing only what she could manage, by keeping the ugliest parts of her life sealed away from the people who might judge her or use them against her. But pregnancy destroys control. It changes the body, the choices, the future. It forces urgency. And for a woman already living with fear, urgency can become its own form of madness. The closer Jacinda came to the point where the truth could no longer be hidden, the more unstable her emotional world became. She was not only afraid of Michael's reaction, she was afraid of the chain reaction that would follow once one secret led to another. Because if Michael learned that she had hidden not only a pregnancy, but the existence of a daughter, his pain would not stay simple. He would feel betrayed, manipulated, humiliated. He would ask himself whether any part of their connection had been honest or whether he had merely been allowed to know the version of Jacinda she believed he could tolerate. That is what made the situation so combustible. Michael was not just being confronted with possible fatherhood again. He was being confronted with the possibility that the woman carrying his child had built their relationship on omissions large enough to destroy trust at its root. And Michael, for all his efforts to remain composed, was already unraveling. The pregnancy awakened his protective instincts, but the secrecy awakened something much darker. Anger. He could accept fear. He could accept complications. He could even accept a painful past. What he could not accept was being shut out of the truth, while his life was quietly being altered behind his back. That sense of exclusion hit him like betrayal, because it forced him into the same emotional territory he had crossed too many times before, the humiliating space where he realizes everyone else knew more than he did, where his future had been quietly negotiated without him, where love had again been contaminated by concealment. The thought that Jacinda had decided on her own what he could handle made him feel powerless, and powerlessness in Michael has never remained calm for long. The more he pushed for clarity, the more Jacinda retreated into fear. She could sense his frustration growing sharper, more personal, more dangerous. But her own panic would not let her move cleanly toward honesty. She feared the pregnancy because it created exposure. She feared Michael's questions because they threatened to tear open the past. She feared what would happen if Phoebe's name became more than a rumor suspended in implication. Most of all, she feared that once the truth came out, she would no longer be seen as a woman trying to protect herself or her child, but as someone who had manipulated circumstances, withheld life-changing information, and built emotional intimacy on a foundation of selective truth. That fear began distorting her decisions. Instead of choosing trust, she chose delay. Instead of offering Michael the full picture, she gave him fragments. Instead of calming the storm, she fed it. And every new omission made the situation worse, because Michael started sensing that he was no longer dealing with one hidden fact, but an entire pattern of concealment. He began to suspect that Jacinda's fear was not random at all. It was tied to a specific threat, a specific history, perhaps even a specific person or event connected to Phoebe. Once that suspicion formed, he could not stop imagining how deep the deception went. What made everything more explosive was that Jacinda's own words kept betraying her. The comment about not wanting her daughter to end up in the same situation was too loaded, too personal, too emotionally exact to dismiss as casual speculation. It sounded like memory disguised as concern. It sounded like regret trying to escape through a sentence too quickly spoken. Michael heard it, and once he heard it, the entire emotional landscape changed. Now he was no longer merely dealing with a pregnancy that frightened Jacinda. He was standing on the edge of a larger revelation, one that suggested this woman had already lived through some version of this nightmare before and had never fully told him how badly it had scarred her. That possibility pushed him into a harsh moral corner. If Jacinda truly was in danger, if this pregnancy could expose her to forces she feared, then his instinct was to protect her, to stand between her and whatever darkness she believed was coming. But if she was still lying, still hiding Phoebe, still refusing to let him see the whole truth even as his own life was being reshaped by it, then protection began to feel like surrender. He was being asked to defend someone who might still be deceiving him. He was being asked to trust in the dark. That contradiction fed his anger until it became difficult to separate concern from resentment. Jacinda felt that change in him and began to panic even more. She saw the questions in his eyes harden into suspicion. She saw that he was no longer simply worried about the pregnancy. He was starting to measure the possibility that she had built an emotional trap around him without ever meaning to, or perhaps while fully meaning to. That is when the atmosphere between them turned volatile. The child growing inside her should have brought them closer, but instead it became the center of a widening emotional war. Every silence felt hostile. Every explanation sounded partial. Every attempt to calm the situation only exposed how much remained unsaid. And beneath all of it lay the possibility of disaster. If Phoebe was real, if Jacinda's fear was rooted in an earlier child and an earlier trauma, then the pregnancy could trigger not only emotional collapse, but the return of whatever forces had once destroyed her sense of safety. Perhaps that is why she hid it. Perhaps she believed that once Michael knew everything, he would step back, judge her, or worse, become another casualty of the same darkness that had once shaped her past. But secrets kept for protection rarely stay protective. They curdle, they isolate, they turn love into suspicion and fear into a self-fulfilling catastrophe. That is why this story feels so dangerous. It is not just about Jacinda being pregnant, it is about what the pregnancy awakens. In Michael, it awakens obsession, anger, and the old terror of being betrayed by silence. In Jacinda, it awakens panic, buried guilt, and the dread that the truth about Phoebe can no longer remain buried. The unborn child becomes the center of a crisis where no one is purely innocent and no one feels safe. Every emotion is sharpened by uncertainty. Every decision carries the possibility of destroying what little trust still exists. If Jacinda finally confesses everything, she may lose Michael anyway, because the truth may prove even worse than his suspicions. But if she keeps hiding, then the explosion becomes inevitable. Michael will not remain patient forever. His fear for the child, his resentment over the secrecy, and his growing fixation on Phoebe will eventually collide in a confrontation too intense to avoid. When that moment comes, this will no longer be a story about a hidden pregnancy. It will become a story about betrayal, survival, and the devastating price of waiting too long to tell the truth. And that is the tragedy already taking shape. Jacinda may have hidden her pregnancy to prevent chaos, yet the silence itself is now creating the very disaster she feared. Michael may want to protect this child with everything in him, yet the more he senses he is being manipulated, the more destructive his reaction could become. Between them stands a secret named Phoebe, a shadow from the past heavy enough to poison the future before it even begins. In Port Charles, that kind of shadow never stays still for long. It spreads. It deepens. And sooner or later, it turns private fear into public catastrophe. Jacinda is no longer fighting only for control of her own secret. Now she is being pulled into a dangerous war with Willow, and that conflict could become the beginning of a far bigger disaster. What makes this storyline so explosive is that Willow is not simply suspicious or jealous. She can sense that Jacinda is hiding something, and once Willow begins pulling at loose threads, the entire truth around Jacinda's life may start to unravel. This is no longer just about pregnancy. It is about identity, fear, and the terrifying possibility that Jacinda herself may not fully understand the trap closing around her. The battle with Willow pushes Jacinda into a corner fast. Willow has too much at stake to ignore another woman standing near Michael with secrets, emotional leverage, and a child on the way. In Willow's eyes, Jacinda is not just complicated, she is dangerous. She is unpredictable, evasive, and possibly carrying a truth that could shatter what remains of Michael's fragile world. That is why every confrontation between them feels like a silent war. Willow wants answers. Jacinda wants protection. But in Port Charles, protection and deception often start to look exactly the same. That is where the real danger begins. The more Willow pressures Jacinda, the more exposed Jacinda becomes. Her past starts to feel unstable. Her story starts to feel incomplete. Even her identity begins to look suspicious, as if the woman everyone thinks they know may only be part of the truth. If Jacinda has been hiding more than her pregnancy, then Willow's attack could force a shocking revelation that changes everything. And once questions about her identity enter the picture, the threat around her becomes much darker. Because secrets like that do not stay personal for long. They attract enemies. They invite manipulation. They turn a vulnerable woman into an easy target. The most devastating twist of all is the possibility that Jacinda may not even know who the father of her baby really is. If that uncertainty is true, then her pregnancy is not a promise of new life. It is a ticking time bomb. It means every emotional claim, every future decision, every plan for protection could collapse the moment the truth comes out. Michael could be drawn deeper into a scandal that was never truly his. Another man could emerge from the shadows. And Jacinda herself could be left carrying not only fear, but humiliation, guilt, and the unbearable reality that she built her future on uncertainty. That is why this story feels so dangerous. Jacinda is fighting Willow on one side, hiding from the truth on the other, and standing in the center of a mystery that could destroy her from within. If she keeps lying, the fallout will be brutal. If she tells the truth, the shock may be even worse. Either way, this is no longer just Jacinda's secret. It is becoming the next catastrophe waiting to explode.